and to its treasure and mysteries, the new channels that will bring you to discover men, places, events, unknown or little known of the eternal city. From the glories of ancient Rome and Christianity to the greatness of Renaissance and Baroque with their priceless masterpieces. Every 10 days, a new episode made directly in Rome with my original video and photo footage. It will be a virtual journey through 28 centuries to invite you to come to Rome and personally experience its history and beauty. But let's start our first adventure. We will discover a little known place, located 30 kilometers from Rome, not far from the Leonardo da Vinci Airport, the ancient Roman necropolis of Portus. A place well preserved and with a particular atmosphere that will make us understand some unknown aspects of the Roman visions of the afterlife. We will dedicate several episodes to this special place. One of the foundations of Rome's success was the maritime transport system created over the centuries. A fundamental element, both from a military and from an economic point of view. Among the ports that could connect Rome with the rest of its empire, those of great importance were the ones made on the coast near the mouth of the Tiber, about 30 kilometers from Rome. The Tiber was the ideal waterway to bring goods into the city from the Mediterranean Sea with special flat-bottom river boats. For this reason, the first port was born right at the mouth of the Tiber River, remaining in operation for several centuries, and around it, the great city of Ostia was born and developed, whose beautiful ruins can still be visited today. But in year 42, the Emperor Claudius, to remedy the cover-up by sand of the Ostia river ports, began the construction of a new large seaport located along the coast north of the mouth of the river. The port, ended by Emperor Nero in the year 64 AD, was a vast basin closed of two long and powerful piers dominated by an impressive lighthouse. The progressive cover-up by sand made the port less and less functional and safe. So the Emperor Trajan, 36 later, built a new inner and larger basin. He reused the lighthouse and the docks of Claudius Port, which formed the external basin of the new port system, adding to this structure a wide hexagonal basin of 33 hectares, a great engineering work that multiplied the docking points for the ships. Around the port, a settlement was created that took the name of Portus. It gradually replaced the ancient city of Ostia as the main support for maritime activities. Merchants, sailors, craftsmen, and loaders populated it. But they too, at their death, according to Roman law, had to be buried far from the city. And so a necropolis dedicated to them was born and developed between the end of the 1st and the 4th century AD along the Via Severiana, the road that connected the new city of Portus with ancient Ostia. Welcome to the Forgotten Necropolis of Portus. This archaeological site has been extraordinarily preserved to this day. The floods of the Tiber and the consequent cover-up of the entire area have allowed excellent conservation of the tombs. The necropolis was discovered in 1925, and other excavation carried out in the following years brought to light the entire necropolis, consisting of around 200 tombs. A city of the dead that still gives us a moving testimony of the relationship of the ancient Roman with afterlife. The tombs that we find here reflect the social structure of the population of Portus, formed by a middle class of merchants, freedmen, freed slaves, and small businessmen, but also by less well-off workers related to port activities, such as sailors, warehouse loaders, craftsmen. In the necropolis we found different kinds of tombs. For the wealthiest there are tombs called cell tombs, consisting of a large square or rectangular room covered with burial vaults or with a flat terrace used for a whole family and the liberti, living with the family, the slave freed. Some of them were built detached, also with a fence around, or in other case, grouped into small blocks. Around them we found green areas, small squares and passageways. Here we are in front of one cell tomb well preserved. First of all, it's worthwhile giving a sight to its facade. It was an important element of the tombs because it was the business card of the family. On the brick regular wall we found a marble door, just over the door a marble slab with an inscription, then two small slit windows, sided by one or more reliefs depicting the profession of the tomb owner, and on top a triangular tympanum. But we will come again to look to these details. Now it is time to enter this tomb. Cross the narrow entrance. We are in the shadow, as it was in their days. The only light is coming by small slit windows and by the door. The interior of each cell was designed to adapt to the funeral rite chosen by the family. This one definitely made for incineration, the long-lasting traditional system of the Romans. The walls of the tombs were covered with several semicircular or rectangular niches called columbaria, because they reminded the breeding houses for the pigeons, in Latin columbus. Normally the ashes were placed in amphora, already embedded in each niche, normally containing 2 urns or more. Sometimes a small marble slab with the name of the dead was placed under. Alongside, we can find a larger, more decorated central niche dedicated to the head of the family and its wife. Now we enter another kind of tomb. During the 2nd century AD, a new burial system took place, the inhumation. Some people found too violent and inhuman to burn their beloved and wanted to respect their body even after death. So many of the older tombs were reorganized for inhumation, like this one. Small niches were destroyed to make place for arc-shaped recesses called arcosolia. The body was laid inside this larger niche in a terracotta coffin. After the early 3rd century AD, every new tombs were exclusively designed for inhumation. But take into account that arcosolia took more space in the grave, to house other members of the family, the floor of the cell began also to be used. It was divided by brick walls into a series of graves called forme. In some cases we find sarcophagus made of marble, richly elaborated, like this one. But in the necropolis there were also a poorer social layer, which buried their dead in the areas left free between one cell and another. Many of these graves have been found in the area called Fields of the Poor. The simplest and cheapest form of burial was a grave directly in the earth. In the case of cremation, the ashes were put into urns or amphora. In case of inhumation, the body was laid into a hole in the ground covered by brick structures. For these tombs, Vertically placed amphorae were often used as an indication of the burial place, and at the same time used for the rite of libation. For the burial of these less wealthy, there was another widespread type of single tomb, so-called tomba a cassone, with a semicircular trunk made of brick. Also in these cases, the builder of these tombs tried to imitate the larger, more expensive cells, adding a small marble door, inscriptions and paintings. But among these, we found sometimes tombs a little out of ordinary. For instance, here we see a tomb made in the shape of a pyramid, or another one covered by a small shrine altar. The tombs, at least for the wealthiest, had to demonstrate the position of the deceased and his family within the society. For this reason, families prefer to set their tomb facing the main road, the Via Severiana. So travelers and passers-by could see and admire their tombs and their wealth. But in addition to size and location, other important elements to identify the owner of the tomb were always inscription and also often bas-reliefs placed on the front wall of the tomb. These items provide valuable data on the social composition of the population of Portus, at least for the well-off, made up mainly of traders, freedmen, and small entrepreneurs. Inscriptions were placed above the door in white marble and usually show the name of the owner, the size of the tomb, the dedication to a relative by the person who carried the construction of the tomb. But also, this inscription reveals some problems that families had to cope with, even after their death. Taking into account the shortage of place for new burials and the cost to build a new tomb, it was very active in the legal market of tombs carried out by fossores, the workers that look after the necropolis. Sometimes they used to sell a burial place for someone in a tomb of a different family, or even they used to move away the first occupant of a tomb after a certain time. These created anxiety in the families owning the tombs, and therefore often we found in the inscription important testamentary disposition and rules of use of the sepulchre. For instance, here we see that the monument could not be inherited by other relatives. In another case, the owner foresees a penalty of 3,000 sesterces to be applied to anyone who dared to bring into the monument body or bones of persons external to the family. Another one invokes a terrible curse against anyone who dared to take away its body from the tomb. Another element of recognition were the sculpture or the bas-relief made in terracotta applied on the facade that remind us the owner's profession. For instance, here we see a surgeon taking care of the leg of a patient altogether with its medical equipment. In another reliefs, we see a midwife bending in front of a woman in labor, sitting in a delivery chair, a system used for centuries to give birth to a baby. In another, we see a man in a short tunic carrying an amphora. This man was probably an aquatarius, a water carrier. Here, we see a manufacturer or a merchant of metal objects like knives and scissors. In this tomb, dedicated to a grain merchant, we see a sheep, probably the one used to import grain to Italy, and a mill in operation moved by horses. One special message comes from a mosaic placed in front of the tomb. We see a lighthouse, probably the one of Portus, sided by two ships. In between, we see an inscription in Greek, a moving farewell, probably of a seaman, which reads, "Here all pain cease." Among the ancient Romans, after death, a person preserved some kind of physical and emotional sensitivity, and therefore needing care over time by their parents and relatives. From here came a series of rites, signs of the bonds of affection between the dead and the survivors. The first sign was the funeral, divided into a series of important and public celebrations, such as the preparation and dressing of the body, the exposure of the deceased, and the procession to the place of burial. On the day of the funeral, the family organized a banquet close to the dead man's grave as a purification tool. But what is interesting is what happened next. A mourning period of about 14 days began. On the 3rd, 7th, 9th, 30th or 40th day, the deceased was commemorated with other funeral banquets celebrated by relatives and friends, always at the tomb of the deceased. These funeral meals were called refrigeria, that is, refreshment, and were aimed at consoling and refreshing both the deceased and the living. And this rite, repeated in other anniversaries or in special days dedicated to the dead, like Parentalia and Feralia, held on the month of February. And to us these banquets, the tombs themselves were adapted with the creation of beds and masonry seats placed both outside and inside the funerary monuments. Sometimes permanent benches called biclinia were built on either side of the entrance, as we can see here in front of this tomb. Pottery and other utensils used in the banquets have been found in some tombs. But in these banquets, there was an invisible guest, the deceased. There were earthen fixtures, terracotta pipes, or cut amphora fixed in the ground, in which relatives poured wine and food to give refreshment to the deceased. There was an important tradition that allowed to maintain the emotional bond between the living and the dead. And the tradition of the refrigeria passed also to the first Christians, at least for a certain time. But this tradition have not completely disappeared over the century. Still today, in many countries of the world, after the funeral, is still in use a lunch or reception among relatives and friends of the dead. We are at the end of this adventure in the Necropolis of Portus. I hope I've managed to convey you the serene beauty of this unique place and to give you the perception of the deep influence that the lifestyle of the ancient Romans had over the countries of the empire up to the present day. Now it's time to resume our journey through the centuries of the Eternal City. In the next adventure, we will move forward to get to the Middle Age, and we will discover another very particular place in the heart of Rome. Thanks for following me and subscribe to this channel. See you soon.